began with a story, one I stumbled across late at night while scrolling aimlessly through the internet. The elevator game, they called it, a ritual that supposedly transported you to another dimension if performed correctly. At first, I laughed it off, dismissing it as just another urban legend designed to spook thrill seekers. But as the hours dragged on, I found myself unable to stop reading about it. The more I learned, the more the idea planted itself in my mind, daring me to try. The instructions were simple, yet unnerving. Find a building with at least 10 floors and an elevator that worked. Enter alone, press a specific sequence of buttons, and follow the rules precisely. By the end of the sequence, you'd supposedly reach a different world. A warning accompanied every version of the story I read. If you encountered a woman on the 5th floor, do not speak to her or look her in the eye. That part chilled me the most. A week later, I stood outside a building downtown, clutching my phone with the instructions saved in my notes. The place was perfect, an aging office tower that seemed almost deserted at night. The dimly lit lobby and flickering fluorescent lights gave the place an eerie atmosphere, as if it was built for this very ritual. My heart thudded in my chest as I pushed open the glass doors and stepped inside. The elevator stood at the far end of the lobby, its dull, metal doors reflecting the faint glow of the overhead lights. I hesitated for a moment, staring at the buttons through the gap in the doors. This was my last chance to turn back, but something inside me urged me forward, a mix of curiosity and the faint thrill of doing something forbidden. I stepped in and pressed the button for the 1st floor. The doors slid shut with a metallic groan, and the elevator jolted slightly as it began to move. My fingers hovered over the buttons, my mind repeating the sequence over and over. First to the 4th floor, then the 2nd, then the 6th, back to the 2nd, then the 10th. I could feel my pulse quicken as I pressed the buttons one by one. The soft hum of the motor, the only sound in the confined space. When the elevator stopped on the 4th floor, I held my breath. The doors opened, revealing an empty hallway dimly lit by flickering lights. My eyes scanned the corridor, half expecting to see someone or something waiting there. But it was empty, just as it should be. I pressed the button for the 2nd floor and willed the doors to close quickly, feeling a strange unease settle over me. By the time I reached the 6th floor, the unease had grown into something heavier, something I couldn't quite explain. The air felt different, heavier, as if the elevator itself was holding its breath. The doors opened, and I caught a glimpse of another empty hallway. This time, though, I thought I saw movement in the corner of my eye. Just a flicker of shadow, gone as quickly as it came. My hand trembled slightly as I pressed the button to return to the 2nd floor. The elevator jolted as it descended, the motor's hum seeming louder now. When the doors slid open again, I stared out into the hallway, feeling a chill run down my spine. Something about the place felt off. The lighting seemed dimmer, the air colder. I told myself it was just my imagination. The final button in the sequence was for the 10th floor. My finger hovered over it for a moment, a part of me screaming to stop, to leave the elevator and go home. But I'd come this far, and turning back felt impossible. I pressed the button, my heart pounding as the elevator began its ascent. Each second felt like an eternity as I waited for the doors to open. When the elevator finally stopped and the doors slid open, I was greeted by an unsettling silence. The hallway outside looked wrong. The walls were a dull, ashen grey, and the lights flickered faintly, casting strange shadows. I stepped forward cautiously, my breath catching as I realized the air felt heavy and cold, almost suffocating. Something about this place screamed that I didn't belong here, I took a hesitant step forward, my foot crossing the threshold of the elevator. The air was heavier now, colder, and I couldn't help but feel like invisible eyes were watching me. I forced myself to move forward, the soft echo of my shoes on the floor almost deafening in the silence. The walls of the hallway seemed closer, the lighting dimmer, but it wasn't until I turned to look behind me that the true weight of the place hit me. There was nothing there. The elevator doors had closed, but beyond them, the hallway stretched into an impossible darkness, as though the building itself had ended, leaving only void. I stood frozen, staring at the abyss behind me, my breath coming in shallow gasps. It wasn't just the emptiness, it was the feeling of being watched, as if something unseen and unfathomable was lurking just beyond the shadows. I wanted to run, but I didn't know where to go. The instructions I'd read said nothing about this. The sequence was supposed to take me to another dimension, but this felt like being trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. As I slowly turned back to the hallway ahead, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A single door at the far end. The rest of the space was lined with identical walls. No markings, no windows. Just this one door, slightly ajar. A faint pale light spilled out from the crack, flickering like a dying bulb. Every instinct screamed at me to stay away, but I was already moving forward, my feet carrying me without permission. The closer I got, the louder the sound became. A soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming against wood. With every step, my unease grew into something visceral. The tapping turned into a faint whisper, a voice so soft it was almost drowned by the sound of my own heartbeat. It wasn't speaking any language I recognized, just a series of low, guttural sounds that seemed to vibrate through the air. My hand trembled as I reached for the door, the cold metal of the handle sending a jolt through my arm. The moment my fingers touched it, the whispering stopped. I froze, holding my breath, waiting for something, anything, to happen. The silence that followed was deafening, pressing against my ears like a physical weight. My mind raced through every possibility. Was this the end of the game? Had I done something wrong? But before I could pull my hand away, the door swung open with a force that nearly knocked me off my feet. The pale light from inside spilled out, illuminating the hallway in an otherworldly glow. I stepped inside cautiously, the sound of my own breathing filling the small, sterile room. It was empty, save for a single chair placed in the center, facing a wall of what looked like security monitors. Each screen flickered with static, but through the noise, I could see faint outlines, shapes that moved erratically, as though struggling to break free from the constraints of the screen. I took a step closer, squinting at one of the monitors. My blood ran cold when I realized what I was looking at. It was me. On the screen, I was standing in the same hallway I'd just left, my face pale, eyes wide with terror. But the thing that froze me in place was the shadow behind me. Tall, thin, and featureless, standing so close it should have been touching me. My hands instinctively flew to my back, but when I turned, the hallway was empty. The figure was nowhere to be seen, but on the monitor, it hadn't moved an inch. I stumbled back, my pulse roaring in my ears. The monitors began to flicker more violently, the static growing louder until it filled the room with a piercing screech. I clutched my head, trying to drown out the sound, but it was everywhere, pressing in from all sides. The light in the room dimmed, and as I turned to flee, I saw it, the shadow, standing in the doorway, blocking my escape. Without thinking, I ran. I didn't care where the hallway led, or if there was an exit at the end. I just needed to get away. My footsteps echoed wildly as I sprinted, my lungs burning with every breath. The hallway seemed endless, twisting and turning in ways that defied logic. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately regretted it. The shadow was still there, following me at an unnervingly slow pace. yet somehow always just a few steps behind. I don't know how I made it back to the elevator, but when I did, I slammed the button for the first floor with all the strength I could muster. The doors closed just as the shadow reached the threshold, its featureless face inches from mine. The elevator jolted to life, and as it descended, the oppressive air began to lift. When the doors opened again, I was back in the lobby. Everything looked normal, but I knew it wasn't over. The shadow wasn't in the hallway anymore, but I could feel its presence, lingering just out of sight. As I walked out of the building, I swore to myself I'd never step into another elevator again.